I'm here to share some insights that I gained from my own vocational story, if you will, the story that has brought me here to St. Paul of the Cross, working in the Archdiocese of Chicago. As you know, I am a Benedictine monk and priest. I've been living and working like a diocesan priest for 6 years now, and that's the direction I'm headed in. But you might say my vocational story goes back to when I first went away to college. Now, I came from a Catholic family. We were an observant Catholic family. I went to Catholic schools. I was a good student. I had won some scholarship money, and I was able to attend Northwestern University, which normally would have been out of the financial league for my family. And it was really kind of a step out of the Catholic aquarium, if you will. You want to think about it that way. And that we're living in a pretty Catholic area, Catholic family, Catholic schools. All of a sudden, I was interested in science, and I knew that there were jobs available for chemical engineers, the oil industry, and all that. This was the late 70s. So I had decided to look into majoring in chemical engineering at Northwestern. Now, I didn't really know that much. I wasn't totally set on it, but I had no other idea about what I wanted to do with my life. And when I went to a place like Northwestern, much more cosmopolitan, somewhat less Catholic than the Chicago area, met a lot of people, very different backgrounds. My first roommate was, he was only there for about 1 quarter. He was from New York State. He was Jewish. He was an art major, and we were very different, totally different background from me. We were talking, getting to know each other the first day or two. He told me he was going to be an art major. He was sort of the artistic type, I guess, the first guy my age who had a beard and mustache that I'd ever known. I told him I was going to be a chemical engineering major, and he immediately asked me, "Oh, is that for your parents? Do your parents want you to do that so you can get a job?" And I was kind of surprised by that question, because no, it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't for my parents, it was for me, but there was a definite expectation in my family that I should find a marketable thing to major in. Well, there's always a demand for engineers. I seem to be a fairly good student in sciences, so, that kind of sent me in that direction. Well, anyway, I spent 4 years there and eventually earned my Bachelor of Science in Engineering, Chemical Engineering. It was one of the most difficult things I've done in my life, I would say. I found it harder than most other things I've tried to do. But finally, by my senior year, it was looking pretty likely, yes, I'm going to graduate, and job offers coming in and so on. I also, having turned 21, started feeling a new interest in my faith. And there were a number of priests that were willing to take some time and talk to the young people there at the university, give them some spiritual direction. And I found, even as I, finishing up my degree and looking towards getting my first job as an engineer, going on job interviews, at the same time I found a renewed interest in my Catholic faith. Because although I had always been a practicing Catholic and I went to church on Sundays, it was a sort of a young person's faith. I'd say it wasn't very deep. I was doing sort of what was expected of me. And then all of a sudden, as I moved into adulthood, I started looking at it in a new way. So all of a sudden it seemed more important to me. And so I did, got a pretty good job at the time with my engineering degree and went to work as an engineer. I was involved with an association of a fairly well-known Catholic organization. I'm not going to get into the particulars of it, but an organization that helps Catholics to combine their faith and their work. That whole idea of vocation, finding your vocation in life. And that's an important question. But I did discover that as I started working as a young engineer, that the engineering work I was doing did not seem nearly as interesting to me as my growing interest in my Catholic faith. It seemed like the more I talked with either a priest, a spiritual director. I had a man who was a PhD engineer who was also a Catholic, involved with a community center in Chicago. I would occasionally meet with him and talk over things. He kind of served as a mentor to me as a young engineer. And I found that my faith was really coming alive to me at that time. And this was a surprise, because in all those years of Catholic school, as a young person, I had never seriously thought about the priesthood. And it did occur to me, even when I was still in college, that I knew I had chosen engineering simply because there were jobs available in that. You know, it's like, you got to get a job, you got to find something to do. You got to make yourself valuable, you know, if you make yourself valuable, if you have the right set of skills, you'll always be in demand. You know, that's part of the whole nature of earning a living, isn't it? But I also discovered that, you know, even the oil industry, like any other industry, has its ups and downs, and a lot of other young people had been attracted into engineering by the promise of good jobs, well-paying jobs, you know, and all. And that's when I started to learn the difference between doing something to make a living and doing a vocation, which is something that you really love doing. And there is a difference there. And so when I finally reached the point where my interest was, I wanted to start looking at the priesthood. I was about 22, almost 23 years old. And it came on so suddenly that some of the people that knew me were kind of surprised. You know, all of a sudden I started talking about it. I had never really talked about it before. And I ended up going back to the school where I had gone to high school, Marmion, out in Aurora, and joining the monastic community there. Now there were a number of reasons for that. And again, my years as a priest and a monk, there was a series of little obstacles to be overcome, because there was sort of a compromise, an uneasy compromise all those years. And this is something about religious life, that, you know, some religious orders do not have priests in them. Some religious orders do. But the jobs of a monk and a priest are not necessarily the same. In a religious community, there's a lot of other work to be done. If your community runs a school, there's a lot of school administration, teaching, coaching, all the mechanics of running a school. That's a lot different than the sacramental work that a priest does. And although I always enjoyed my work as a priest, I visited many different churches in those years in the monastery, helped out at many different churches, always enjoyed that. My experience of life working and living in the monastery was a much more mixed bag. It had its ups and downs. And what I gradually learned as the years went by was that it was the priesthood aspect of it that really gave me satisfaction. And that was really what sort of fulfilled me in the sense of a vocation. But it took a while to work that out. And life in two different monasteries. And so I would say three little lessons that I've learned from my own life and my own vocational story is, first of all, the importance of a mentor. You know, it could be a good teacher, an inspiring teacher, or a coach, an older person, a friend with experience in your line of work. But that was probably something that made a difference for me, having the sort of that individual attention from a man who understood, you know, and could kind of guide people. Mentors are very important to people. Likewise, it is, if you've ever been in an organization where the people who are in authority don't really seem to care about you, you know, again, one of the other speakers mentioned it, that's one of the most negative feelings you can have, part of an organization where the leadership says, okay, we have things set up this way, we want to keep everything exactly this way, and your job is to fit in as best you can. That's not a good not a pleasant experience to work for an organization like that. So that importance of a personal mentor or somebody who inspired us, encouraged us along the way is all important. The second point I would make is that whole question of we do have a lot of different interests in life. Some of them are hobbies, but then we have our real vocation in life, and that can change, and we can have more than one vocation in different times of life. But if God is calling you to a certain thing as your vocation, you probably won't be satisfied treating it as a hobby. And the other way around too, that if you're interested in something as a hobby, you probably won't be satisfied doing that as your life's work. You know, there's a big difference between the thing that we have a passion for and the maybe half dozen or more things that we simply find interesting and enjoy doing once in a while. For example, I know there's a couple people here in the audience that I have played music, acoustic music with. You know, I play 5-string banjo. That's a hobby. I would not want to do that for a full-time living. I would not want to try to do that. When I was in my younger days, I was in the early days of computers, you know, with my engineering background. I was interested in computer games many years ago when computer games were a new thing. And once as a hobby, I set out to write my own computer game, and I spent all my spare time for 1 month doing that. And at the end of that month, I had what I thought was a fairly decent game, and I also had a certain knowledge that I would not want to do that for a living. You know? A big difference between a hobby and a vocation, an avocation and a vocation. Big difference. That's my second lesson. And then the third lesson is that we're all aware of our own weaknesses. You know, I have weaknesses like all of us, but I'm not a perfect person by any means. The ups and downs of my vocational story kind of reflect that. But what I've learned is don't let my knowledge of my own weaknesses keep me from trying to do new things, because I've learned the most about my life when I stepped out of my comfort zone. You know, whether it was going to a secular school like Northwestern, spending 12 years out in Great Plains when I grew up in the Chicago area. You know, those kinds of things that stretch you. They may be difficult there, and again, I've probably learned some of the best lessons in my life from the most difficult parts of my life. For example, I learned that I have some kind of a physical condition. It doesn't rise to the level of an illness or a syndrome or something, but let's just say that, of course, insomnia is something that no one likes insomnia. Insomnia is bad for all of us, and I've been lucky that through most of my life I never had any trouble with it. But I did learn from a number of situations that if something does disturb my sleep for more than a few nights in a row, it becomes very serious very quickly for me. And even more so, this was when I suffered a time of terrible insomnia about 9 years ago as a side effect of a medication I was taking, where I had to spend some time outside of the monastery for medical care. That was a life-changing experience. Although it was probably the most dangerous time of my life, it also was the big change as far as my decision to step out of monastic life and into full-time ministry. And it's a decision I've never regretted in the 9 years since. So that'd be the third point, that don't let your knowledge of your own weaknesses keep you from answering God's call, or at least doing the things that you're passionate about. And that's it. Any questions?
Would you say that God can still work through you in spite of your weakness?
Yes, not just in spite of our weaknesses, but just like St. Paul sometimes says, that God can make use of our weaknesses to, God's power is shown sometimes in our weaknesses. It's like the most important decisions I made in my life were as a result of dealing with my own weaknesses, medical or whatever. Yes. Well, thank you all.
Thanks.